Check that you have all your panels, your front right, front left and back, sleeve, collar, placket and facing. Before you start sewing, change your needle to a stretch needle, change your footer to a walking footer, and change your stitch length to a lightning stitch. Fold the placket into half lengthwise and sew along the short edge with a 1 cm seam allowance. Turn it inside out and iron well. Sew along the open edge with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Mark out all your notches according to the paper pattern. Position the placket on the front right panel so that it matches the first and the last notch. Align the placket so that the raw edges are in line with the raw edge of the front panel. So the folded edge is actually facing the inside of the dress. Grab the right facing panel and we're going to align this on top. Sew all panels down with a 1 cm seam allowance. For the front left panel, align the front left facing and sew it down with a 1 cm seam allowance. Put the front and back panel together and sew at the shoulder seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock once you're done. Sew the sleeve to the armhole with a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam and push the seam allowances upwards and top stitch. Sew up the front and back panels at the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam, push the seam allowances towards the front and top stitch. Place the collar panels together and sew them with a 1 cm seam allowance. Grab a pair of scissors and trim away the excess material to reduce the bulk. turn it inside out and iron. Top stitch along the same edge with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Sew the collar to the neckline. Align the notches to the shoulder seam. Start the collar right at the edge where the facing starts. Pin in place and sew it down with a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam and turn it inside out. Fold the facing and iron. Sew down the facing with a 3 cm seam allowance. You can choose to sew it from the right side or the wrong side. For the sleeve hem, fold it up by 2.5 cm and sew it with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. For the dress hem, fold it up by 2.5 cm and sew it with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Following the markings on the paper pattern, go ahead and finalize this dress with any types of closure you may want to use, such as hook and eye, snap buttons, or just regular buttons. And there you have it, your dress is completed.